you've seen time and again these leaders that are given South American leaders that are given these IMF dollars. I mean, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It is not 100%. I mean, there's a little James Bond there, but not too much, man. I mean, there's still enough there. There's still enough meat on the bone to make it worth your time. Do you mind? I mean, if you have anything to say about Sankara, I mean, I think this is an important thing to understand, because I don't think people really truly realize the depths the IMF goes to get its hooks in to a country. It basically strips them of their sovereignty. And
right. It's a debt trap. I mean, in fact, interestingly enough, it's exactly what we in Western media and Western ideals, what we accuse China of doing to the third world. It's exactly what we accuse them of doing, but we're doing it, and we've been doing it for years. And that's actually at the root of so many foreign policy decisions from the US, so many events. Like, one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes going on right now is the war in Yemen. Well, if you travel back like 8 or 9 years, you'll see that it had its roots in the IMF wanting to restructure the Yemeni economy. And a bunch of people didn't like that. The Houthi rebels, they started out because there were massive protests against cuts in gas subsidies to the country. Like, there were massive protests against those policies, and then you see the country slowly devolve into a brutal civil war. Now it's just a turkey shoot. Saudi Arabia's blockading the country, starving millions of people to death. But it had its roots in the desire to integrate Yemen, integrate the rest of the entire world into an economy controlled by United States oligarchs, controlled by United States capital, and backed up by the United States military. You see this pattern over and over and over again, and country after country, third world leader after third world leader has said that this is an impossible choice. You cannot force us to sell out our own people. Some do under duress. Some do because they don't care about their people, but some don't, and they're crushed. I mean, we all remember the 2019 coup in Bolivia. Well, a few years before that coup, Evo Morales had rejected an IMF deal. And, well, when the coup regime got in under Janine Áñez, well, they instantly took an IMF loan. And when they were kicked out, just to show you how ridiculous these loans are, they had to pay. They were kicked out a year later. And Bolivia, the new Bolivian government, wanted to return the loans, but they owed interest. They owed tens and tens of $1 million in interest that was accrued over, I think it was less than a year. It was like 10 months. So these loans are not meant to be repaid back, but they're meant to keep countries in debt slavery, in debt servitude.
Please put me back. Yes, absolutely. This, folks, if you know nothing about anything, okay, the big countries, the countries that have energy sovereignty, food sovereignty, access to ports, supply chain sovereignty, you name it, they can really do everything in-house. They don't need exports if they didn't need to. They could survive without exports. Those countries have full monetary sovereignty as well. They can do pretty much whatever the hell they want. It's these other countries that are untapped, that are called third world. We should feel so bad for them that they're primitive or less evolved. But in reality, it's code for, when can we start digging? When can we start knocking trees down, baby? When can we bring the heavy machinery and pull a full-blown Avatar on that region? And that right there is the model. And I don't think people realize, because, this is where we can have a little bit of an expanded conversation, because obviously Ukraine, I mean, you got blonde hair, blue-eyed people showing up. It's a little different look and feel than when you're bombing Yemen, or when you're bombing Afghanistan, or you're bombing Iraq, or you're bombing through AFRICOM, through Africa. It's a little different, and it gets reported a whole lot differently as well, right? But this debt trap, it doesn't have a color to it. It doesn't have a region to it. Bottom line is, capital doesn't give a flying where it's coming from. It wants more, right? And you look And I mean, goodness gracious, if you think about Lenin and his imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism book. And folks, if you haven't read this, even if you hate communism and everything else, if you haven't read this, you're really missing out. Especially if you go, not to put too fine a point on it, to chapter 9, okay, and you get to hear about all the stuff that we're talking about. And this goes back before the IMF even existed. This was a business model of global finance capital at the turn of the century, the 1900s. I mean, we're talking about Marx and Engels could have talked to you about this. And so now, in front of your face, you've got geopolitical stuff going on that is just, it's almost as if you're reading the newspaper from 1900s and the year 2022, and you don't even realize it. Most people have not invested in theory. Most people have not given themselves a analytical framework for understanding class struggle. And most people don't have a clue what is going on here, other than the things that are repeated, and they get to be on team, hey, I'm on what is it? What was that Twilight movie? Team whoever and team whatever, team Edward and
Edward
team
and Jacob.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous nature of it. I'm a fiend for information. I don't play team sports. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the role of global capital here? Because I don't think people quite understand how voracious and relentless and pernicious global capital is when it sees a country like the Ukraine that's underperforming, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, well, to zoom out at like the macro level, I mean, this is exactly what Lenin talked about. This is the highest stage of capitalism. There is an internal logic built into how we run our economy, baked into this free market economic system, and that logic is prefaced on infinite growth, unlimited expansion, infinite capital growth, right? And so eventually, when a country gets big enough or when capital gets too big in a country, well, there's no real place left in the United States to exploit, to strip, to own, to claim, to buy, and so capital starts looking for foreign markets. Capital looks abroad. Uh, we had the what was called the Monroe Doctrine in the United States. In our history books, we framed it as a noble effort to prevent European countries from colonizing the Western Hemisphere. But in actuality, what it really was, and they explained it pretty clearly at the time. Our teachers just lied to us. But it was about expanding the economic influence of these, small colonies turned giant nation. And so now it's like, okay, well, where do we go? Where are new markets? Well, we look at South America, very resource rich. A lot of wealth can be extracted from there. And so our entire relationship with Latin America is based on this logic of capital expansion. Like if you want to look at it, even before World War II, typically well, at least when I talk about empire, I refer to the post-war period. But before World War II, most of United States interventions in Latin America were based on some company didn't like the fact that the locals were taking their land. And so we sent in the Marines to go shake them down. If there was like a strike, it'd be like, okay, well, we'll go mow them down. We'll send in the Marines and mow them down. Like this is the bloody logic that drives our economy. And after World War II, when we became the most powerful country in the world, that was ratcheted up to the extreme. I mean, one of the first examples of post-war U.S. imperialism is Guatemala. In 1954, we overthrew the government there because United Fruit Company, now I believe they're called Chiquita, they didn't like the fact that the moderate liberal government was expropriating land that the United Fruit Company wasn't using and then gave that land to peasants. That's unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. The CIA, Allen Dulles, all them, we overthrew the government. Like hands down. Like it was one of the most blatant coups, and they were extremely excited about it. Even before that, we did it in Iran because Iran wanted to nationalize a British oil company, and the United States were extremely close to the British, and so we helped them overthrow the Iranian elected government, the first democracy that they had, and now look where Iran is. So this is a logic that's built into United States foreign policy and economic policy.
So, hey, Colin, bring me back on. So, the reason why I took us down this path is because I see Ukraine and the battle here as you could strip away the words Russia, Ukraine, and the EU, and you could make it Venezuela, the IMF, and the US, or you could make it any number of things. And this is not a one-off, right? That's the point. This is not like some random thing that just happened. This is an entire model, right? So if you understand the news, if you're understanding the model of the IMF and the US's interactions with it, and the G7 and the rest of these folks with the WTO and all, and understand the structural arrangements that they do, the debt, they don't need that money back. They are the creator of that money. They don't care about the money. It is literally there to force extraction and force markets to be open. And that is the entirety of, like, you can read all the news all day long around the world, and this is the underlying message of capital. Capital is clawing its way around the globe to do exactly this. And it's always sniffing around for a weak spot. And there, if you looked at the playbook, I mean, there's playbooks that we don't even know are getting ready to crop up simply because this model is looking for the next Ukraine, looking for the next Venezuela, looking for the next Sankara moment, right? They're all out there. And this is kind of perpetuated by this IMF, WTO, World Bank approach to nation building, quite frankly, and market creation and expansion and so forth. And for those that don't think about it in those terms, that are only focused on the neo-Nazis part, which is an important thing. Let's not diminish that. We fight fascists wherever they are, not because we'll win, but because they're fascists, right, Chris Hedges? So I'm with you on this. I just want to make sure people are looking at this, because this will show up again. And instead of getting caught up in the next whatever comic book narrative they throw at you for why it's happening, you got to understand that the underlying business model of the IMF and these groups is to do exactly this repetitively over and over and over again. Once that becomes part of your thought process and you start analyzing things through a theoretical framework, understanding the business model, it will clear you up from a lot of the propaganda that is out there. Just if you just can get that part of it down. I mean, Bryce, do you agree with me, or am I off the out of my mind here? Because I know some
No,
people. I think I am.
you're absolutely right. And I want to stress again what you said about the simple cartoon narrative that people seem to want to throw themselves on. Like I'll have conversations with people about this, and I'll talk about the history. I'll talk about the IMF. I'll talk about the 2014 overthrow. I'll talk about the U.S. refusal to negotiate with Russia all the way through this crisis till the day they invaded. But then they'll say, "Nah, Putin's bad. What do you mean? Why are you defending Putin? Putin invaded a country. That means we have to do something." Well, that works if you stay in the comic book world. But if you have a framework for understanding U.S. policy, if you have the historical and, I guess, economic outlook of a longer arc of historical trends and forces, you'll see that, okay, well, maybe it's not right to just say Putin is Hitler. We got to fight Hitler. Maybe there is something on our end that we are doing that might be hastening the destruction of Ukraine or the world.
Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in to Status Coup's daily live stream Monday through Thursday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and Fridays at 4 o'clock Eastern Time.